AITA for rejecting my ex who came back pregnant after a year apart? The first time I saw Cassidy, soaked and 7 months pregnant, trying to climb through my kitchen window while the house alarm blared and half the neighborhood was recording on their phones, I thought things couldn't get any worse. Her mascara was running. Her clothes were clinging to her body. She was covered in muddy grass. And a patrol car was already on its way because someone had called 911 about an attempted break-in. It's still hard for me to understand how we got to that scene from the day she told me she just needed a break. But every story has its path, and this is mine with her. I met Cassidy at a mutual friend's birthday party. Back when I still believed that people who talked about finding themselves were serious and not just making an excuse to run away when things got tough. In the beginning, our relationship was intense, the kind where you see each other almost every day. You sleep in the same bed, even though you each have your own place. And you start accumulating toothbrushes and t-shirts in every corner. I'm a more structured person, stable job, bills paid on time, clear goals. She was always the free spirit, the artist, the one who said life was too short to live in fear. I thought we balanced each other out well. She pulled me out of my rigidity a bit, and I gave her some of the stability she'd never had. Over time, that stability started to suffocate her. First, it was casual comments about me being too routine. About always going to the same grocery store, sitting on the same side of the couch, watching the same shows. Then came the complaints that I wasn't as spontaneous as I used to be, that I had become too responsible. As if paying the mortgage and not disappearing for days on end was a serious flaw. It reached a point where any serious conversation turned into drama. If I talked about the future, she'd respond with something like she was still young and needed to live before being tied down to anything. I started to store those phrases in my head like little alarms I wasn't ready to hear yet. The infamous night she asked for a break was late on a Tuesday, when I had already changed into sweats for bed. Cassidy sat on the couch with a strange seriousness and told me she needed just that. A break, space to find herself. She delivered it with an almost rehearsed speech, saying I was a good man. That the problem wasn't me, but her need to figure out who she was outside of a relationship. That she didn't want to hurt me, but she was being honest. She didn't cry. Neither did I. I just felt a strange mix of emptiness and relief. Like when you finally turn off an alarm that's been buzzing in the background for a while. She took 2 small roller bags, some clothes, but left many things hanging in the closet, saying she wasn't taking them so it wouldn't seem like a permanent breakup. She promised we would talk in a few weeks to see how we were feeling. Those weeks never came. For the first few days, I got short text replies. Then she started taking longer to respond, until one day I noticed her profile picture was gone. I was blocked on everything. The funny thing was, she forgot that her photo account was public. I couldn't message her, but I could watch her finding herself on beaches, in bars, on rooftops, and on spontaneous road trips. In several photos, she was embracing a guy I didn't know, covered in tattoos. Always on a jet ski or with drinks in their hands. In the comments, people called them the water couple. They talked about how they envied their chemistry. The break turned into almost a year of me watching from a screen as she lived her life, while I tried to rebuild mine from my home. The same one I continued to pay for alone during that year. I'm not going to lie, it hurt. There were nights I thought about texting her from another number. Others when I scrolled through her photos like someone picking at a scab. There were also days when I just got up, went to my office, came home, cooked for one, and got used to the silence. I packed up her things little by little, without any ceremony. One day, there was nothing of hers left in the drawers. For me, that prolonged absence, without a single direct call, spoke louder than any speech. In my head, the relationship was over, even though we'd never had a final conversation. That's why, when I heard persistent knocking on the door at 7 a.m. one Saturday, the last thing I expected to see when I opened it was Cassidy. She was standing in front of me with a very prominent 6 or 7 month belly, a tense smile, and a rolling suitcase. She didn't even ask if she could come in. She crossed the threshold as if she had only been gone for a weekend. She said she was finally ready to settle down, that the time apart had helped her clear her head, and that she had realized I was the stable man in her life, her safe harbor. As she spoke, She kept caressing her belly as if it were part of her speech. I listened in silence. With that mix of surprise and coldness that comes out when someone who erased you for a whole year reappears as if nothing happened. I asked her whose baby it was, and her answer was a perfect twist. She said that biologically it wasn't mine, but morally it was. That technically we had never broken up, we were just on a pause. That I had always been constant, and that fatherhood wasn't just a matter of blood, but of commitment. She said it with impressive confidence, as if she truly believed that because she had left without any closure. I had remained frozen in time, waiting, ready to receive the whole package, gift-wrapped. In that moment, I felt something I couldn't tell if it was rage or exhaustion. I went to get my phone without saying a word. I opened that photo account she never deleted and started swiping through her own posts in front of her face. There she was with Jackson, the tattoo guy, riding a jet ski, kissing at parties, hugging on beaches with sunsets in the background, congratulating each other on anniversaries, and posting comments about being soulmates. I asked her if she was also on a pause while she was posting all of that. She didn't yell at first. She was speechless. Then she started to stammer, saying she didn't understand why I was focusing on those details. That it didn't change the fact that I had always been there for her, that real men know how to forgive. I was no longer in a conciliatory mood. I told her I had no intention of taking care of a baby that wasn't mine and, on top of that, was the product of a time when she chose to erase me from her life. I told her I wasn't anyone's pause button, that my chapter with her had closed the day she blocked me from everything. I said that if she needed someone to take responsibility, she should go find the guy with the jet ski, the same one she'd spent a year toasting to her freedom with. That was the point when she started to cry for real, accusing me of being cold, a coward, of throwing her out on the street. She told me that if I kicked her out, I would be the villain, the man who abandoned a pregnant woman. I felt something inside me click into place. For a long time, I had doubted whether I was being too harsh, if maybe I should have reached out, if I had done something wrong. Hearing her try to flip the blame onto me, using her pregnancy as a key to get back into my house, made it clear to me that she was incapable of taking responsibility for what she had done. There was no shouting on my part, no spectacle. I just opened the door, moved her suitcase toward the exit, and told her that everyone chooses the role they write for themselves in their own story. Cassidy went out into the hallway crying, looking around to see if anyone was watching, assuring me that I would regret it later, that life comes full circle, and one day I would realize I had rejected my own family. I bolted the door and leaned against it for a moment, listening to her sobs through the wood. I didn't feel immediate relief or satisfaction, just a heavy silence and the certainty that something had been broken for good. I made myself a coffee, sat in the same living room where she had asked me for a break a year earlier, and thought that at least this time, she wasn't the only one making the decision. Update 1. The peace lasted less than a day. That same afternoon, messages started pouring in from an unknown number. First texts, then endless voice messages. Cassidy repeated the same idea over and over, that I had abandoned her in her most vulnerable moment, that a real man takes care of a child even if it isn't his, that after so much time together, I had a moral obligation to be by her side. Each voice message was loaded with crying, dramatic pauses, and phrases about destiny, family, and the chance for redemption. I listened to some, deleted others without opening them. I knew that if I responded, I would just be extending a script that wasn't mine to play. When she saw that wasn't getting her what she wanted, she moved on to another front, my family. One day, my mom called me with a strange tone, somewhere between annoyed and confused. She had also received her own collection of voice messages. Cassidy had told her that I had left her practically on the street with a baby on the way. That after years together I had treated her like a stranger, not even offering her a glass of water, in the version she gave my mother. I was a heartless guy who refused to take responsibility for an innocent child just because he didn't share my blood. It was an old but effective move with someone who didn't know the other side of the story. My mom asked if the three of us could talk. I told her that before any conversation, I'd prefer she checked something on her own. I asked her to look up Cassidy's profile. She wasn't her friend on the platform. So I spelled out the username and stayed on the line while she opened it. I heard the silence on the other end as the photos began to load. My mom is no fool. With a quick glance, she understood that the sabbatical year I had barely mentioned had actually been a full-blown relationship with Jackson, vacations included. She didn't say anything for several seconds, then just let out a sigh that translated to, "I get it." After that, my mom wanted to call Cassidy to confront her. She wasn't on the phone for long, hanging up much faster than I expected. She later told me that at first, Cassidy tried to stick to her story, saying those were mistakes from the past, that I had always been her true love, and that the thing with Jackson was just confusion. When my mom asked why, if I was so important, she had blocked me from everything and disappeared for a year. Cassidy had no answer and changed the subject, going back to the baby, to pity, to the idea that motherhood had transformed her. From that moment on, that family door was closed to her. My mother never answered her calls again. That didn't stop Cassidy. She changed her strategy and began to alter her narrative depending on the audience. To some, she said I had always been a controlling guy, that I pressured her so much she had to leave without explanation to protect her mental health. To others, she said I was obsessed with biology and didn't understand that fatherhood was an act of love, not genetics. In every version, the ending was the same. I was the man who had left her pregnant and on her own. Meanwhile, I continued with my routine. I went to work, came home, and did my thing. I knew the gossip was circulating. You can feel it in the strange looks, in the neighbors who greet you differently, in the friends who send messages asking, "What really happened?" When someone close to me asked, I told them the basics. She asked for a break, disappeared for a year, and came back pregnant by another man, wanting me to take responsibility. No insults, no exaggeration. I learned that when you stick to the facts, the story holds up on its own, and hers was starting to fill with holes. Cassidy couldn't stand that her campaign wasn't having the desired effect. She started posting passive-aggressive things on social media, texts about men who abandon, ultrasound photos with captions like, "Above all, I chose you," and things like that. She didn't mention me by name, but people who knew us knew who she was talking about. I decided not to play that game. I blocked her profiles so I wouldn't see anything more and held on to a very simple thought. She could build whatever story she wanted. But as long as there was no legal paperwork with my name on it, they were just words thrown into the wind. What I didn't know was that her attempt to pressure me emotionally still had a few more levels to go, and would soon move from the screen to my own front gate. Update 2. The next twist came via message. One day, after several failed attempts to make me look like the bad guy, Cassidy changed her tone. She sent me a very long text saying that the baby's biological father was incommunicado. In one voice message, she said he was in some legal trouble. In another, that he had probably left the state. In yet another, that his family wouldn't give her any information. The versions changed by the minute. The only constant in her story was that Jackson was no longer available, and, coincidentally, the only stable man left in the story was me. She ended every voice message with the same idea, that the universe was testing me, that life was giving me a chance to show what kind of person I was. She spoke of destiny with a conviction that bordered on a bad script. She argued that if I had always been there for her, if I had been her partner and her support, then it was obvious this baby was meant to solidify our life project together, even if he didn't carry my blood. She repeated that a home isn't built on biology, but on who stays. And she underlined that the other guy had left, which proved who the real father was. It was all framed to make feeling responsible easier than holding my own boundary. But I was no longer at a point where I confused affection with obligation. Since I wasn't responding to her messages, she moved on to the in-person phase. She started showing up in front of my house almost every afternoon. She would sit on the curb, belly out front, with a look of practiced suffering. And she'd stay there for a good while, crying just enough to get the neighbors' attention. To anyone who passed by, she would tell an abbreviated version in which I was the man who refused to acknowledge an innocent child. She didn't mention Jackson, or the year on the jet ski, or the blocking. She just talked about how, after so much time together, I had rejected her in her most fragile moment. At first, I would peek from the upstairs window and stay still. I didn't want to go out and make a scene or give her more material. I would just let her get tired and leave. But the days started to string together, and the scene kept repeating. Some neighbors bought her story. Others would later come ask me carefully what was really going on. To those I trusted, I told the basic, unadorned facts. Little by little, the narrative began to split into two camps. Those who only saw a pregnant woman crying on the street, and those who knew that this pregnant woman had decided to erase me from her life for a year while she went on vacation with someone else. One afternoon, I decided to go outside, not because I wanted to talk, but because I was tired of feeling like my own front door had become a stage. I told her calmly not to sit there again, that she was free to seek help wherever she wanted, but that my breaking up with her didn't make me a villain or responsible for the decisions she had made with another man. I added that if she insisted on using my house as her theater, I would have to call the police and report her for harassment. She went from tears to indignation in seconds. She told me I had no shame, that everyone was going to find out who I really was. It wasn't a clean conversation. There were accusations from both sides. She brought up things from the past, good moments mixed with accusations, as if happy memories were a signed contract. I limited myself to repeating that our relationship had ended the day she left, and that what happened afterward with her life, and with another person's child, was not something she could just throw on my shoulders for convenience. She looked at me with a mix of contempt and desperation, slowly gathered her things, and left, muttering that she wasn't going to give up, that I would see what it was like to carry that guilt for the rest of my life. The following days, she didn't sit on the curb as much, but I saw her drive by the block more often. Sometimes she would just stand in front of the gate, looking at the house as if she were planning something. I started to be more vigilant, checking the security cameras before bed and making sure all the windows were locked. I had that uncomfortable feeling of knowing someone was trapped in a version of the story where you are indispensable, even after they've spent a year proving they didn't need you at all. What I didn't imagine was that her next move would cross a physical line, not just an emotional one. In parallel, the name Jackson started to become almost a legend. Some mutual friends mentioned they had seen him in trouble, others that he had moved to another city, and others that he had never been stable, and everyone knew it except Cassidy. Depending on who you asked, he was either a victim of a bad crowd or a completely irresponsible guy. By then, I didn't care if he was a fallen angel or a walking disaster. The only thing I saw clearly was that he was the part of the story she didn't want to own. And it was easier to try to recycle me as a lifesaver than to face the reality that the father of her child wasn't going to be there, not even in pictures. Update 3. The night of the break-in attempt started like any other. It had been a long day at work, and I just wanted a simple dinner, to watch some TV, and go to sleep. I was getting used to checking the security cameras on my phone before turning off the lights, a new habit thanks to this whole situation. That night, I did it almost on autopilot. Around midnight, I heard a dull thud from the back of the house, like a clumsy bang against metal. It wasn't the typical sound of a raccoon or something falling in the wind. I stood still, grabbed my phone, and opened the camera app. On the screen was the scene I still have etched in my memory. Cassidy was in the backyard, drenched in sweat, with that enormous belly that seemed to weigh her down, trying to force open the sliding window that led to the kitchen. She had gone through the side gate, probably thinking I was asleep and no one would see her. She was pulling on the frame with one hand while holding onto the wall with the other. She looked exhausted and out of place, but also determined to cross a line I had made clear to her several times. For a few seconds, I just stared, more surprised than anything else. I had an automated sprinkler system in the backyard, as well as a loud security alarm I had almost never had to use. It wasn't a calculated or cold decision. It was more like a sudden wave of exhaustion. I activated the sprinklers and then turned on the alarm from my phone. In seconds, the sprinklers started spraying water forcefully all over the yard. Cassidy froze at first, then turned around in confusion as the water drenched her from head to toe. Her clothes stuck to her body, her makeup ran down her face, and her hair fell in front of her as if the night were swallowing her whole. The alarm went off with a shrill sound, the kind that pierces your ears. The exterior floodlights flashed on, illuminating the scene like an improvised stage. The neighbor's dog started barking. A light came on in the second-floor window of the house next door, and I saw on the camera someone coming out onto their balcony with their phone in hand. You didn't have to be a genius to guess they were recording. Cassidy tried to run to the back of the yard to get out, but the wet grass had turned to mud, and she slipped a couple of times, trying to protect her belly with her arms. While I watched all of this unfold, I called 911. I didn't do it as a threat. I did it because I felt I could no longer treat her behavior as the tantrums of someone who was hurt. I reported that a person was trying to force entry at the back of my house, that she had been harassing me at my door for days, that she was pregnant, and that I needed someone to come before something more serious happened. I didn't go down to yell at her or make a scene. I stayed upstairs, watching from my phone with a mix of secondhand embarrassment and contained anger, wondering how we had reached this point. When the patrol car arrived, the cameras recorded the rest. The flashing blue lights reflected off the walls. The sound of the engine cut through the neighborhood chaos. The officers came through the side gate after I buzzed them in. They found Cassidy soaked, shivering from cold and rage, with her clothes plastered to her and her makeup a mess. The first thing she did was point at the house and say I was trying to harm her, that I had intentionally soaked her while she was pregnant, putting the baby's life at risk. I explained what had happened from upstairs. I then came down calmly, showed them the full camera footage on my phone, and told them the whole story. From the daily appearances at my door to the attempt to open the window. The officers weren't exactly naive. They watched the video, listened to my explanation, saw Cassidy's insistence on dramatizing every detail, and took notes. They suggested I file a formal police report for attempted trespassing and harassment, to have a record in case things continued to escalate. Cassidy, seeing that her version wasn't landing as she had hoped, switched roles and became the misunderstood victim. She said she just wanted to talk to me, that I wouldn't let her, that she felt desperate, and that she had nowhere else to go. One of the police officers replied that it didn't justify trying to enter a house through a window, especially at midnight. When they escorted her away, not in handcuffs or anything, but just to make sure she left the property, the whole neighborhood was already awake. There were lights on in several windows, half-drawn curtains, and silhouettes watching. The neighbor on the balcony sent the video to the neighborhood group chat, and as it usually happens, it started to circulate. The next day, the title they had given it was a mix of mockery and gossip, something like The Pregnant Trespasser. I didn't find it funny, but I also wasn't the one in the video making a spectacle of myself. What I did feel was a new kind of discomfort. The feeling that your life had become an episode that everyone was whispering about. After filing the report at the station and providing the videos as evidence, I walked out with the feeling of having set a firm boundary for the first time. It wasn't the way I would have chosen. I wish none of it had been necessary. But we were no longer in the realm of minor relationship arguments. It had become a situation where someone refused to accept that she was no longer part of your life, and was trying to cross every possible line to force you into a role that wasn't yours to play. After that night, something also changed in Cassidy's circle, though I only found that out later from someone else. Update 4. The police report wasn't just a piece of paper. The news quickly reached Cassidy's family. Her mother, who at first seemed willing to support her through anything, began to see the full picture. It was no longer just the story her daughter told her through tears. Now there were videos, comments from neighbors, and the fact that she had tried to break into a house at midnight, pregnant with another man's child. Her patience was wearing thin. She had other children, other problems, and less energy to sustain so much drama. Arguments started behind closed doors. I found out through a distant cousin who knew my sister. Cassidy complained that no one supported her, that everyone was taking my side, and that no one understood the pressure she was under. Her mother would reply that needing help was one thing, but going to an ex's house to create a scene that involved the police was another. Keeping her at home became a problem, especially since the gossip had already spread through their social circle. There's always someone who shares the video in the extended family group chat. There's always an aunt who chimes in that, "You just don't do that." The scandal began to outweigh the compassion. In the end, the only one who opened her door was a distant aunt, Brenda, who lived in an old house on the outskirts of town. The kind with 2 stories and a damp basement where they kept old junk. The condition was clear. She could stay as long as she helped around the house, cooked, cleaned, and watched the young grandchildren who were there almost every day. It wasn't an invitation, it was a survival deal. Cassidy accepted because she didn't have many options. The baby's father was lost in his own problems. I wasn't willing to play the role she wanted. And her own mother was starting to see her more as a burden than a martyr. Little by little, her life's setting changed. From photos on jet skis and beaches, she moved to a reality of waking up early to make breakfast for others, cleaning floors, and taking care of children who weren't hers. All in exchange for a makeshift mattress next to the washing machine in the basement. I learned these details from scattered comments, from people who knew the aunt's family, through those invisible wires that carry stories through neighborhoods. I didn't take pleasure in her situation. I'm not the type of person who enjoys watching someone fall. But I also couldn't ignore that she was now living a very different version of the freedom she had been seeking. She tried to maintain a certain image on social media, at least at first. Occasionally, she would post photos of food, of her belly silhouetted in the mirror, of quotes about rising from the ashes. But the video from the sprinkler night had already circulated through too many groups. Every time she posted something, comments would appear that mixed mockery with reproach. They reminded her of the scene at the window, the water, the siren. Some people supported her, yes, but many more were dedicated to reminding her of her own spectacle. The account that was once her showcase for admiration became a hostile place. At some point, she decided to make her profile private. She didn't announce it, it just ceased to be visible. For someone who had always been so concerned with appearances, with being seen, that must have been a heavy blow. Without her showcase, without the jet ski boyfriend, without the stable ex she wanted to recycle as a lifesaver, and without a family willing to support her every move, she was left with a much smaller and heavier life, made of household chores, dependency, and a mattress in a basement. Her pregnancy progressed while she scrubbed floors and hung laundry in someone else's yard. From my side, I continued with my routine. Sometimes, a new comment about how she was doing or what she was saying about me would reach me. They always ended with the same line, that she still insisted I was a heartless guy who had abandoned her. Hearing that no longer triggered me as it once did. By that point, it was clear to me that her version would never align with mine or with the facts. I chose to let go of the need to defend myself at every turn. With the police report filed, the videos saved, and the physical distance, the weight of her words became just background noise. What did leave a mark on me was the lesson of how far someone can go when they refuse to accept another person's decision. Cassidy had spent years repeating that she wanted freedom, that she hated feeling tied down. When she had it, when she made decisions in the name of that freedom, she then tried to make someone else responsible for the consequences. She ended up dependent on a distant aunt in a basement, doing exactly what she claimed to detest, adapting to schedules and rules she hadn't chosen. It was a sad irony. But it wasn't something I could fix without stepping back into a role I had already left behind. Update 5. 2 years after all that, my life looked very different. I sold the house where I had lived with Cassidy and moved into a smaller apartment in another area, a more anonymous one. I wanted to leave behind not just the memories, but also the stage that had become the theater for her scenes. I changed neighborhoods, routes, and habits. It wasn't a panicked escape. It was a conscious decision to truly close that chapter, not just with words. My belongings fit into a few boxes, and I liked that. The feeling that I could move without carrying too many ghosts. Occasionally, I would run into old neighbors or acquaintances who followed gossip like a sport. In one of those conversations, I found out that Cassidy had given birth to the baby in a public hospital. Without any major luxuries or a dramatic entourage, Jackson never officially appeared. There was no signature on the birth certificate, no happy family photos, no jet ski riding godfather posing by the crib. Apparently, he was still wrapped up in his own problems, maybe in another state, maybe dodging responsibilities from various places. The fact is, on paper, the child was hers alone. Her life with Aunt Brenda didn't improve much. She remained in the basement, now sharing it with a crib, bags of diapers, and piles of laundry. The debt to her aunt was paid with more domestic work, more hours watching children, and fewer hours for herself. The woman who once talked about travel, independence, and spontaneity now organized her days around meal times, laundry cycles, and late-night crying. This wasn't because of divine punishment or cinematic karma, but simply because of the sum of the decisions she had made and the doors she had closed on herself. I was also told that when she talked about me, she would say I had been the love of her life who didn't know how to forgive. She would repeat a version where I had rejected a child that wasn't mine purely out of pride, painting me as a rigid man incapable of a selfless act of love. In her narrative, I was the real villain, and the biological father was just a romantic mistake she was trying to recover from. Every time someone told me that, I felt a strange mix of annoyance and relief. Annoyance because no one enjoys being painted as a monster. Relief because that story no longer had any real influence over my day-to-day life. I never tried to correct her. I didn't go to her friends, her family, or her new acquaintances to give my side. Those who wanted to know found out the facts at the time. Those who preferred to stick with the novel she was telling weren't going to change their minds just because I showed up with proof or screenshots. I learned that some battles are won by simply not fighting them, by letting time and distance do their work. The important thing for me was that my name wasn't on any document, that I owed no child support, and that I was legally untethered to a life I had not helped bring into the world. Over time, the story stopped occupying the center of my mind. I started dating again, meeting people, with a new caution I didn't have before. I became clearer when talking about boundaries, about what I was willing to tolerate and what I was not. I didn't become distrustful of everyone, but I did learn to take the early signs of someone refusing to own their decisions very seriously. Every time I heard someone talk about taking a break without clarity or leaving things on pause without any closure, an internal alarm that I no longer ignored would go off. Sometimes, on quiet nights, the image of Cassidy in the yard, soaked under the sprinklers, trying to get through the window of a house where she no longer belonged, would come to my mind. I didn't remember her with hatred, but as an extreme example of what happens when someone clings to a distorted version of reality and tries to drag others into the same script. I was lucky or clear-headed enough to get off that stage in time. She, from what I know, is still trapped in her role, repeating over and over that the bad guys in her story are always other people. What I was left with in the end was not the easy laughter of gossip, but a kind of quiet determination. I will not allow someone to use my life as a backstop for a movie I didn't write. If anyone ever asks me why I didn't take on that child, the answer will be simple. Because he wasn't my son. And because loving someone doesn't obligate you to erase your dignity or your memory. There are responsibilities you choose and others that people try to impose on you. I chose mine. And among them was not cleaning up the mess for some jet ski guy who didn't even have the courage to show up when he was called to the stage. If you like the stories, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.